Hello Yu-Gi-Oh! Players and welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Business Casual. I'm your host, the RJB0. So we are entering into a new format, which is awesome for a couple of reasons. The first being, of course, that everything is new. We get to look at new dominant competitive strategies, the tiers are shifting, and that's always fun. But the other reason why it's awesome is because that happening creates a little bit of chaos at the beginning of the format, which means we, as competitive players, get to experiment around a little bit with some old and new strategies to try and make our decks more creative, more innovative, and of course, ultimately more competitive during this time. And one of these ideas that I have been paying particularly close attention to is the concept of Splashable Engines. A Splashable Engine is a group of cards from one archetype or deck that you can translate into other decks. So a great example of a Splashable Engine is the Plant Engine, which we used for ages in various different decks that consisted of your 2 Lone Fire Blossoms, your Dandelion, your Spore, and your Glow-Up Bulb. Eventually Lone Fire got limited, and then of course everything else got banned except Dandelion. But the point is, you saw just tons of decks that would run this Plant Engine in it to improve their ability to Synchro Summon and to make their decks more explosive. A great example of a deck that utilized the Plant Engine was Karakuri Machina Plants, which was the big thing until, of course, Librarian and Formula got limited. But that aside, then of course Billy Brake came along and made his tour guide Tengu Plants. Tour guide is a Splashable Engine all of its own, but you can see how the Plant Engine as a Splashable Engine really improved certain decks during a format. Now, there are some really cool advantages to using a Splashable Engine in one of your main or dominant strategies or your main deck. One of those advantages is that it diversifies your strategy. If your deck is kind of a one-trick pony, then you can bring in a second engine in order to diversify the possible plays that it can make, which is usually a good thing within a given format. It also means that if your deck has a particular weakness, then you can fill that weakness with a Splashable Engine. However, Splashable Engines do, of course, come with some disadvantages as well, one of which being that in the fact that they do diversify a deck's strategies, they also limit the number of cards you can run from each strategy because, of course, they do take up room. If you want to run a Splashable Engine, that means you have to take out some cards that might have helped your dominant strategy, your main strategy, in order to run it. But one of the other disadvantages is that it can make consistency in your deck a little less potent because, of course, if you're running 2 different decks, then you're more likely to draw into an awkward combination of 2 different engines than you would be if you were running one single deck. That being said, if you are using the best cards and the best strategies out of 2 different archetypes, you can get the best of both worlds and be more likely to draw into a more powerful strategy, and I'll get to that when I talk to you guys about the individual engines that are the reason why I'm talking to you guys about this today, which is the fact that with this new format and with Primal Origins coming out, we are entering a possible new era, a new renaissance of Splashable Engines, you could say. Which means that we have, of course, all the old Splashable Engines that we used to have, all sorts of things like that, but we're also creating a ton of new ones that are each very promising in their own right. And I think I can think of 4 of them right now, which are Trap Tricks, Artifacts, and Ghost Tricks, and then the one I want to talk about because it's a new idea that I've just been kind of playing around with, which is the Tanki Engine. Now, what the Tanki Engine is it's kind of the manifestation, this format, of what I was talking about with why Brotherhood of the Fire Fist Bear is the best card in the game, which is that Bear creates its own engine, like Tour Guide used to. It, through the use of Tanki and Bear, can produce just tons of advantage in and of itself, which is why I was also talking about in that same video the fact that +1 Fire Fist is basically using a bunch of splashable draw cards and search cards in order to support Bear and Wolfbark as a partnering strategy, just because they produce so much advantage on their own, which means that now that Wolfbark is at 1, you can still run that same strategy at a smaller level and splash it into other decks. And the way you do that, the way I've been doing it, is by running 3 Tanki, 3 Bears, and 1 Wolfbark in basically any deck at this point, because while this deck does use up normal summons. While this particular Splashable Engine does use up normal summons, that isn't that much of an issue, because if you put Bear on the board and you have a Tanki, you're basically going to wreck face for a little while, because especially if your opponent only has one monster, or one big monster and then a monster weaker than Bear, you can pop the big monster, run over the opponent's monster, use Bear's effect to get a Tanki, search another Bear, search Wolfbark ultimately. So it really, the using up of the normal summon isn't that much of an issue, but it also takes away from the consistency issue that is produced by using Splashable Engines, mostly because the entire thing, except for Wolfbark, is made up of search power. And even Wolfbark, if you have a Bear in the grave and you draw it dead, it isn't really dead, because you can use it to make an Exceed summon, and if you want to continue the searching, you can go for Tiger King, and then use that to search Tanki, and use the Tanki to get a Bear. You see what I mean. So the Tanki Engine is a really powerful one. Another great one, of course, is the Artifact Engine, which a lot of people in Japan have been experimenting with. The way I've been doing the Artifact Engine recently is running triple Theosophy of the Artifacts and 2 Artifact Moral Talk, and then I have been splashing in Call of the Haunted, depending on whether I think that it can support the main strategy of the deck. The nice thing about that is that it is a strategy that you can use during your opponent's turn to interrupt strategies, because your Moral Talk can summon onto the board and pop whatever card your opponent needed to make an Exceed summon, or to make some kind of ignition effect or something like that, which is really nice. So it interrupts plays, and that's a big thing. But another thing that's great about it is it doesn't use up your normal summon. You just set it to your back, the Theosophy to your back row, you hit that Moral Talk, and you disrupt their strategy. If you use Call of the Haunted, it makes it even more consistent, because once you put a Moral Talk into the grave, you can just keep bringing it back and popping stuff, especially if it can support your deck on its own, and then the Call of the Haunted is just basically always live. So those are some of the advantages of that particular engine. It does have the disadvantage of having a consistency issue, which is if you draw into your Moral Talks, then your Theosophies become dead, and that's a little bit of a problem. You can solve that problem if it's really that much of an issue for you, by running maybe an extra artifact monster in your deck. You could run Caduceus, since you can use that and then use Call of the Haunted to bring back your Moral Talk, and then so you can see how you can splash that engine into a couple of other things. The other great thing about artifacts as an archetype is that the main deck can support more splashable engines. Once again, because they don't use their normal summon, that means that you are free to splash in engines that do use the normal summon, like the Tanki Engine, or the Trap Tricks Engine, which is another thing that Japan has been experimenting around a lot with, which is the use of Myrmelio, Dionaya, and then Bottomless Trap Hole, Regular Trap Hole, and Trap Tricks Trap Hole Nightmare, or Void Trap Hole, depending on what your meta is. In most cases, right now at least, I think that Trap Tricks Trap Hole Nightmare is a better card. It's all up to personal preference, but what that does is you can put that into basically any deck and give it the ability to put defensive back row on the board. But it also gives you the ability to not just make rank 4 Exceeds plays, but be able to pop your opponent's back row and make a rank 4 Exceeds play, which is really great, because you go into the Dionaya to Myrmelio, pop a back row, overlay into an Exceeds monster, proceed to wreck face. If you have the Dionayas and you just have to use up one in order to, run over an opponent's monster or something like that, then you can use that Dionaya to bring back a Trap Hole card and use it on your opponent's next turn as a defensive strategy. So the Trap Tricks Engine is a really great one. It's especially good for those decks that really don't use up your normal summon very often. Decks that have issues with defensive plays can benefit from the Trap Tricks Engine, and also it can improve the slower decks in being able to give them some time to roll out their strategies. And one of the examples of that deck that is also a splashable engine is the Ghost Trick Engine. A Ghost Trick Engine is a splashable engine. You also have the Ghost Trick deck as a main strategy, but the Ghost Trick Engine is basically the use of Jiangshi, Mary, and some combination of either Spectre, Ghost Trick Lantern, or Ghost Trick Jack Frost, whichever you prefer, of course, in some combination or in no combination. Those 3 cards, or those 3 strategies, are very splashable into especially decks that have issues with the fact that they use up their normal summon too often, so they don't have very many defensive plays in that front. So you can use the Ghost Trick Engine to supplement a lot of other decks, because it's a great way of deck thinning. If you use Spectre, you can gain a lot of advantage around it. You can do a lot of stall power, and Jiangshi is just a ridiculously good card when in combination with Mary. So those are just some examples of splashable engines that you could possibly use, and ways that they can improve your decks. Of course, discuss more splashable engines and decks that you can use them in the comments section below. Meanwhile, I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why in the comment section below. And of course, subscribe for more decks, discussion, analysis, and general Yu-Gi-Oh! Shenanigans. Thank you guys for watching Yu-Gi-Oh! And Business Casual. I'm your host, the RJB0, and I gotta jet. See ya.